The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the weathered wooden walls of Ayomide's modest dwelling in Lagos. The soft golden rays illuminated the small room, casting a warm glow on the sleeping forms of mother and son. Ayomide stirred, her eyes fluttering open as consciousness slowly returned. For a moment she lay still, savoring the quiet of the early morning and the comforting presence of her son, Adedayo, sleeping peacefully beside her. Today was the day they had been working towards for years, the day Adedayo would leave for university. The thought sent a mixture of emotions coursing through Ayomide's heart: pride, hope, and an undercurrent of fear. She had poured every ounce of her being into raising Adedayo, working tirelessly to ensure he would have opportunities she could only dream of. Now, as he stood on the cusp of a new chapter in his life, Ayomide found herself reflecting on their journey. Quietly, so as not to wake Adedayo, Ayomide slipped out of bed and made her way to the small kitchen area. She began preparing a simple breakfast of akara and pap, the familiar motions bringing a sense of comfort amidst the uncertainty of the day ahead. As she worked, her mind drifted back to the day she discovered she was pregnant with Adedayo. She had been young, barely out of her teens, when she fell for Ade's smooth talk and empty promises. When she told him about the pregnancy, his reaction had been cruel and dismissive. "You think I want to be saddled with a bastard child?" He had spat, his once charming face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You entrap me with your wiles, you conniving wretch." The memory still stung, even after all these years. Ayomide had found herself alone, cast out by the man she thought loved her, with no family to turn to for support. Those early days had been dark, filled with fear and uncertainty. But the moment she held Adedayo in her arms for the first time, something shifted within her. Looking into his innocent face, she made a silent vow: no matter what it took, she would give this child a life filled with love and opportunity. The years that followed were a testament to Ayomide's determination and resilience. She took on any job she could find, cleaning houses, selling goods in the market, mending clothes, often working from sunrise to well past sunset. Every naira she earned went towards providing for Adedayo food, clothes, and most importantly, education. Ayomide had never had the chance to complete her own schooling, but she recognized the power of knowledge. From the moment Adedayo could understand, she impressed upon him the importance of learning. "Education is the key that will open doors for you, my son," she would tell him. "With knowledge, you can rise above any circumstance." Her words took root in Adedayo's young mind. From his earliest days in school, he showed an insatiable curiosity and a dedication to learning that made Ayomide's heart swell with pride. She would often find him poring over his books late into the night, his face illuminated by the flickering light of their single kerosene lamp. As Adedayo grew older, his academic prowess became evident. His teachers praised his intelligence and work ethic, often telling Ayomide that her son had the potential to go far. These words only fueled Ayomide's determination to see Adedayo succeed. Despite the long hours and back-breaking work, Ayomide made sure to be present for every important moment in Adedayo's academic journey. She attended every parent-teacher meeting, her threadbare clothes standing in stark contrast to the more affluent parents, but her head held high with pride in her son's achievements. When Adedayo was in his final year of secondary school, his science teacher, Mr. Okafor, took a special interest in him. Recognizing Adedayo's potential, Mr. Okafor began mentoring him, staying after school to help him prepare for university entrance exams. "Your son has a brilliant mind, Mrs. Adimi," Mr. Okafor had told Ayomide one afternoon. "With the right opportunities, he could do great things." Those words had lit a fire within Ayomide. She redoubled her efforts, taking on even more work to save for Adedayo's university expenses. Many nights she went to bed with an aching back and blistered hands, but the thought of Adedayo's bright future kept her going. Now, as she finished preparing breakfast, Ayomide heard Adedayo stirring. She turned to see him sitting up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. At 18, he was on the cusp of manhood, his lanky frame beginning to fill out, his face losing the roundness of childhood. But when he looked at her and smiled, Ayomide still saw echoes of the little boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and toothless grins. "Good morning, Mama," Adedayo said, his voice still husky with sleep. "Good morning, my son," Ayomide replied, her heart swelling with love. "Are you ready for your big day?" Adedayo's face lit up with excitement, but Ayomide could see a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "I think so, Mama. I can hardly believe it's finally here." Ayomide brought the breakfast to their small table, and they sat down to eat. As they shared the meal, a comfortable silence fell between them, both lost in thought about the changes to come. Mama, Adedayo said after a while, his voice serious, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for me. I know how hard you've worked to give me this opportunity. I promise I won't let you down." Ayomide reached across the table to take her son's hand. "My dear Adedayo, you could never let me down. You have already made me prouder than I ever thought possible. All I ask is that you do your best and stay true to who you are." Adedayo nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will, Mama. I'll make you proud." After breakfast, they began the task of packing Adedayo's belongings. It was a sobering reminder of their humble circumstances. Everything he owned fit into a single, battered suitcase. Ayomide carefully folded his clothes, smoothing out the wrinkles with loving care. Each item held memories: the shirt he had worn on his first day of secondary school, the trousers she had mended countless times, the sweater she had saved for months to buy him last winter. As she packed, Ayomide slipped in a few surprises: a new notebook, a pack of pens, and a small framed photo of the two of them. It wasn't much, but she hoped these small tokens would bring him comfort when he felt homesick. Adedayo, meanwhile, was carefully wrapping his prized possessions: his textbooks. Many were secondhand, their pages dog-eared and margins filled with notes, but to Adedayo, they were more valuable than gold. Each represented hours of study, of dreams and aspirations. As the morning wore on, neighbors began to stop by to wish Adedayo well. Word had spread quickly in their close-knit community that the Ayomide boy was off to university, a rare achievement in their neighborhood. Each visitor brought a small gift or words of encouragement, their pride in Adedayo's accomplishment evident. Mrs. Okoro, their elderly neighbor, pressed a small package into Adedayo's hands. "It's just some homemade chin-chin," she said with a warm smile. "To remind you of home when you're far away." Mr. Adeleke, who ran the local provision store, arrived with a bag full of toiletries and snacks. "You'll need these," he said gruffly, though his eyes were kind. "Can't study on an empty stomach." Even Adedayo's childhood friends, many of whom had long since left school to work and help support their families, came to say goodbye. There was a touch of wistfulness in their eyes as they congratulated Adedayo, a glimpse of what might have been under different circumstances. Ayomide watched these interactions with a full heart. This community had been their support system for so long, stepping in to help when times were tough. Their generosity and kindness had played no small part in getting Adedayo to this point. As midday approached, it was time to leave for the bus station. Adedayo hoisted his suitcase, while Ayomide carried a small bag with food for the journey. They stepped out of their home, Ayomide pausing to lock the door behind them. As they walked through the narrow streets of their neighborhood, neighbors called out final words of encouragement and good wishes. The bus station was crowded and noisy, a cacophony of voices, honking horns, and the rumble of engines. Ayomide gripped Adedayo's hand tightly as they navigated through the throng of people. They found the right bus and joined the queue of passengers waiting to board. As they stood in line, the reality of the impending separation began to sink in. Ayomide felt a lump forming in her throat, but she swallowed hard, determined to stay strong for her son. Adedayo, too, seemed to be struggling with his emotions, his usual confident demeanor giving way to a nervous energy. "Adedayo," Ayomide said softly, turning to face her son, "I want you to remember something. No matter where you go or what you achieve, you will always be my little boy, and this will always be your home." Adedayo nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. He pulled his mother into a tight embrace, burying his face in her shoulder like he used to do as a child. For a moment they stood there, holding each other, oblivious to the bustle around them. Finally, it was time for Adedayo to board the bus. Ayomide pressed a small envelope into his hand. "For emergencies," she said firmly, cutting off his protests. Inside was every spare naira she had managed to save over the past few months. With a final hug and a whispered "I love you," Adedayo boarded the bus. Ayomide stood on the platform, watching as her son found his seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, Adedayo waved, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Ayomide waved back, keeping a smile on her face until the bus was out of sight. Only then did she allow the tears to fall. The journey back to their empty home was a blur for Ayomide. The streets that had seemed so alive with possibility that morning now felt hollow and gray. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, the silence was deafening. Adedayo's presence, which had filled their small home with life and laughter for 18 years, was conspicuously absent. Ayomide moved through the rooms, straightening things that didn't need straightening, her hands seeking occupation to distract her mind from the ache in her heart. In Adedayo's corner of the room, she paused, running her hand over his pillow. The faint scent of him lingered, and for a moment she allowed herself to be overwhelmed by the emotions she had been holding at bay. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Ayomide pulled herself together. She had known this day would come, had worked towards it for years. Now was not the time to falter. Her son needed her to be strong, to provide a stable home for him to return to. With renewed determination, Ayomide began to plan. She would pick up extra shifts at the market, maybe look for additional cleaning jobs. Every extra naira would go towards supporting Adedayo's education. And in her free time she would learn to use the smartphone Adedayo had taught her to operate, so they could stay connected despite the distance. That night, as Ayomide prepared for bed, she said an extra long prayer. She prayed for Adedayo's safety, for his success in his studies, and for the strength to face this new chapter in their lives. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of her son and the bright future that lay ahead of him. Meanwhile, Adedayo's journey to the university was a whirlwind of emotions. As the bus wound its way through the busy streets of Lagos and onto the highway, he alternated between excitement for the future and a gnawing homesickness. He clutched the small bag of chin-chin Mrs. Okoro had given him, the familiar scent bringing a sense of comfort. The bus was filled with other students heading to various universities across the country. Some were chatting excitedly about their expectations, while others sat quietly, lost in thought. Adedayo found himself somewhere in between, making polite conversation with his seatmate but often lapsing into reflective silence. As the hours passed and the landscape outside the window changed, Adedayo's mind wandered to the challenges that lay ahead. He knew university would be different from anything he had experienced before. The coursework would be more demanding, the competition fiercer. And for the first time in his life he would be truly on his own, without his mother's comforting presence nearby. But along with these concerns came a sense of anticipation. This was what he had been working towards for so long. All those late nights studying by lamplight, all the sacrifices his mother had made, it was all for this moment. He was determined to make the most of this opportunity, to prove that his mother's faith in him was well placed. As the bus neared the university town, Adedayo's excitement began to overshadow his nervousness. He craned his neck to catch his first glimpse of the campus as they approached. The sight of the imposing gates and the sprawling buildings beyond made his heart race. This was to be his home for the next 4 years, the place where he would shape his future. The bus pulled into the station, and Adedayo gathered his belongings. As he stepped off the bus, the hustle and bustle of the university town enveloped him. Students were everywhere, some clearly freshmen like himself, looking a bit lost and overwhelmed, others moving about with the confidence of upperclassmen. Adedayo took a deep breath, shouldered his bag, and began the walk to campus. As he passed through the university gates, he felt a sense of awe. The campus was beautiful, with well-manicured lawns, stately buildings, and students milling about everywhere. It was a far cry from the crowded streets and modest schools he was used to. Following the signs and the directions he had memorized, Adedayo made his way to the freshman dormitories. The building was a hive of activity, with students and parents moving in, voices echoing in the hallways. He found his assigned room and pushed open the door. The room was small but functional, with 2 beds, 2 desks, and 2 wardrobes. One side of the room was already occupied, personal items scattered about, but Adedayo's roommate was nowhere to be seen. He set his suitcase down on the empty bed and began to unpack. As he carefully placed his clothes in the wardrobe and arranged his books on the desk, Adedayo's eyes fell on the small framed photo his mother had packed. It was a picture of the two of them, taken on his last birthday. In the photo, they were both smiling broadly, his mother's arm around his shoulders. Adedayo felt a lump form in his throat as he placed the photo on his desk. Despite his excitement, he already missed her terribly. A noise at the door made him turn. A young man about his age stood there, looking slightly awkward. "Hi," he said. "I'm Chidi. Guess we're roommates." Adedayo nodded, extending his hand. "I'm Adedayo. Nice to meet you." As they shook hands, Adedayo took in Chidi's appearance. He was dressed in clothes that were clearly expensive, and a laptop bag was slung over his shoulder. Adedayo felt a moment of self-consciousness about his own modest attire and lack of technology, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was here to learn, not to compare himself to others. Chidi moved into the room, setting his laptop on his desk. "So where are you from?" he asked, clearly trying to break the ice. "Lagos," Adedayo replied. "You?" "Abuja," Chidi said. "My dad works for the government." They continued to make small talk as they finished unpacking, learning bits and pieces about each other. Chidi, it turned out, came from a wealthy family and had attended some of the best schools in the country. Adedayo was more reticent about his own background, simply saying that his mother had worked hard to send him to university. As evening approached, there was a knock on their door. A resident advisor poked his head in, informing them of a welcome dinner for all freshmen in the dining hall. Adedayo and Chidi made their way there together, joining the throng of new students, all looking a bit lost and nervous. The dining hall was enormous, far larger than any Adedayo had seen before. Long tables were laden with a variety of foods, the smell making his stomach rumble. As he filled his plate, Adedayo couldn't help but think of his mother. How many meals had she skipped to ensure he had enough to eat? He silently vowed. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the bustling streets of Lagos as Ayomide hurried through her small living room, straightening pillows and dusting surfaces that didn't really need dusting. Her movements were fueled by a nervous energy, a mixture of excitement and anticipation that had been building all week. Today was the day of Adedayo's weekly phone call, and Ayomide couldn't wait to hear her son's voice. 3 years had passed since Adedayo left for university, 3 years of challenges, growth, and change for both mother and son. The separation had been difficult at first, with Ayomide often finding herself standing in the doorway of their small home, half expecting to see Adedayo walk in from school as he had done for so many years. But as time passed, she had grown accustomed to the new rhythm of their lives, finding comfort in their regular phone calls and the knowledge that her son was thriving in his new environment. Ayomide glanced at the clock on the wall, a recent addition to their modest home, purchased with some of the extra money she had been earning from her growing snack business. The hands seemed to be moving impossibly slowly as she waited for the appointed time of Adedayo's call. Finally, the old phone on the side table began to ring. Ayomide's heart leapt as she rushed to answer it, her face breaking into a wide smile as she heard her son's familiar voice. "Hello, my son," she exclaimed, the joy evident in her tone. Mama Adedayo's voice came through, filled with an excitement that immediately caught Ayomide's attention. "I have big news." Ayomide settled into her favorite chair, preparing herself for whatever her son had to share. Over the past 3 years, she had become accustomed to Adedayo's enthusiastic reports about his studies, his projects, and his growing ambitions. But something in his voice today suggested that this news was different, perhaps more significant than usual. "Tell me everything," Adedayo, she encouraged, her curiosity piqued. "Remember the water filtration project I've been working on?" Adedayo began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The one I told you about last month? Well, it's been selected for funding by a non-profit organization." Ayomide listened intently as Adedayo explained the details of his project, a low-cost water filtration system designed specifically for rural communities. He spoke of the potential to help thousands of people gain access to clean water, of the lives that could be improved and even saved by this technology. As Adedayo talked, Ayomide felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This was why she had worked so hard, sacrificed so much to give her son the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. She thought back to their own struggles with clean water when Adedayo was young, the countless times she had boiled water to make it safe for him to drink. Now her son was working to solve that very problem for others. "Oh, Adedayo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are doing such important work. Your father would be so proud." The words slipped out before she could stop them. It was rare for Ayomide to mention Adedayo's father, the man who had abandoned them before Adedayo was even born. The subject had always been a difficult one, fraught with pain and unanswered questions. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and Ayomide held her breath, wondering if she had said the wrong thing. But when Adedayo spoke again, his voice was soft and filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mama," he said. "But it's you who should be proud. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Your sacrifices, your encouragement, they're the reason I'm here doing this work." Ayomide felt her heart swell with love for her son. Despite all his achievements, all the new experiences and knowledge he had gained, Adedayo had remained the kind, thoughtful boy she had raised. It was moments like these that made all the years of hardship worthwhile. As their conversation continued, Adedayo shared more details about the project and what it would entail. He would be traveling to different villages to implement the water filtration system, working with local communities to ensure its effectiveness and sustainability. The work would be challenging, he explained, but he was excited about the opportunity to make a real, tangible difference in people's lives. Ayomide listened with rapt attention, asking questions and offering words of encouragement. She could hear the passion in her son's voice, the determination to succeed not just for himself, but for the people he would be helping. It reminded her of the countless nights she had spent working multiple jobs, pushing through exhaustion, because she knew it was all for Adedayo's future. Now he was channeling that same determination into his own work. As their call drew to a close, Adedayo promised to keep her updated on the project's progress. "I'll call you every week, Mama," he said. "I want you to be part of this journey too." After saying their goodbyes and I love yous, Ayomide sat for a long while, the phone still clutched in her hand. Her mind was awash with memories and emotions. She thought of the tiny baby she had cradled in her arms, vowing to give him a better life. She remembered the young boy who had stayed up late studying by lamplight, determined to excel in his studies. And now, that boy had grown into a man who was using his knowledge and skills to help others. The pride she felt was almost overwhelming, but it was tinged with a bittersweet realization. Her son was no longer just hers, he belonged to the world now, his talents and compassion reaching far beyond the small home they had shared. It was a mother's joy and sorrow to raise a child to fly and then watch them soar away. But Ayomide didn't allow herself to dwell on the sadness. Instead, she channeled her energy into action, just as she had always done. If Adedayo was going to be traveling to rural villages, he would need supplies, maybe new clothes suitable for field work. She made a mental list of things she could send him, already planning a trip to the market to find the best deals. Over the next few months, Ayomide followed Adedayo's progress through their weekly phone calls. She learned about the challenges he faced, skeptical village elders who were wary of new technology, logistical issues in transporting equipment to remote areas, technical problems with the filtration system that required creative solutions. But she also heard about the triumphs, the first successful installation, the smiles on children's faces as they drank clean water for the first time, the gratitude of mothers who no longer had to worry about their families falling ill from waterborne diseases. Each call painted a vivid picture in Ayomide's mind. She could almost see Adedayo, kneeling beside a newly installed filtration system, patiently explaining its operation to a group of villagers. She imagined him working late into the night, tinkering with the system to improve its efficiency. In her mind's eye, she saw the positive changes rippling through the communities he visited: healthier children, more productive adults, a renewed sense of hope and possibility. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were times when Adedayo called sounding tired and frustrated. One particularly difficult week, he confided in her about a village where the elders were resistant to the new technology, preferring to stick with their traditional methods of water collection and treatment. "I don't know how to convince them," Mama Adedayo said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "They see me as an outsider, someone who doesn't understand their ways. How can I help if they won't let me?" Ayomide listened patiently, her heart aching for her son's distress. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a moment, carefully considering her words. "Adedayo, my son," she began gently, "remember when you were small, and I would try to get you to eat your vegetables. You would refuse, no matter how much I told you they were good for you. Adedayo chuckled softly at the memory. Yes, I remember. I was quite stubborn. You were, Ayomide agreed with a smile in her voice. But do you remember what finally worked? It wasn't me lecturing you about nutrition. It was when I started involving you in cooking, letting you choose the vegetables at the market, showing you how to prepare them in different ways. You became curious, and that curiosity led to acceptance. There was a thoughtful silence on the other end of the line as Adedayo absorbed his mother's words. I think I understand, Mama, he said slowly. Instead of trying to convince them, I need to involve them. Let them be part of the process, not just recipients of the end result. Exactly, Ayomide said, her voice warm with pride. Show them respect, learn from them even as you teach. Your knowledge is valuable, my son, but so is theirs. Find a way to bring the two together. Adedayo's next call was full of excitement as he shared how he had put her advice into practice. He had spent time with the village elders, listening to their concerns and their traditional knowledge about water sources. He had involved them in the design process, incorporating some of their ideas into the filtration system. Slowly but surely, the community was coming around, seeing the value in the new technology while still honoring their traditions. This became a pattern in their calls, Adedayo sharing his challenges, Ayomide offering her wisdom and support. Despite the distance between them, their bond seemed to grow stronger. Ayomide found herself eagerly anticipating each call, not just to hear about Adedayo's work, but to share in his joys and sorrows, to offer the comfort and encouragement that only a mother could provide. As Adedayo's project progressed, Ayomide noticed changes in herself as well. Inspired by her son's entrepreneurial spirit and his dedication to improving lives, she began to look for ways to expand her own horizons. The small snack business she had started to supplement her income was growing, gaining popularity in the local market. One day, as she was preparing a batch of akara, a thought struck her. If Adedayo could use his education to make a difference, why couldn't she use her skills in the same way? She began to experiment with her recipes, trying to create healthier versions of traditional snacks. She researched nutrition, learning about the importance of balanced diets and how to incorporate more vegetables and whole grains into her products. Soon, Ayomide's healthier snacks were causing a stir in the market. Mothers appreciated having nutritious options for their children's school lunches. Office workers enjoyed having tasty but guilt-free snacks for their tea breaks. Word spread, and Ayomide found herself with more orders than she could handle alone. In one of their calls, she shared her success with Adedayo, her voice brimming with excitement as she described her new creations and the positive response they were receiving. Mama, that's wonderful, Adedayo exclaimed. You're making a difference too, in your own way. Helping people eat healthier, providing jobs, you should be proud of yourself. Ayomide felt a warmth spread through her at her son's words. For so long, she had focused all her energy on Adedayo's future. Now, she was carving out a new path for herself, and it felt exhilarating. As the months passed, both Ayomide and Adedayo found themselves busier than ever. Adedayo's water project was expanding, reaching more villages and gaining recognition from larger organizations. Ayomide's snack business was growing, and she had even hired 2 young women from the neighborhood to help her keep up with demand. Despite their busy schedules, they never missed their weekly calls. These conversations became a lifeline for both of them, a chance to share their achievements, seek advice on challenges, and simply enjoy each other's company, even if only through a phone line. One particularly memorable call came about 6 months into Adedayo's project. He had just returned from a village where they had installed the filtration system a few months prior. The transformation he witnessed had left him deeply moved. Mama, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you should have seen it. The children were healthier, attending school regularly because they weren't sick from contaminated water anymore. The women of the village told me they no longer spent hours every day fetching water from distant sources. They were using that time to start small businesses, to spend more time with their families. Ayomide listened, tears welling in her eyes as Adedayo continued. And there was this little girl, Mama. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. She came up to me with a drawing she had made. It was a picture of the water filtration system, with smiling people all around it. She said it was magic, that it had made her little brother stop getting sick all the time. There was a pause as Adedayo collected himself. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with a quiet determination. "That's when I knew, Mama. This is what I want to do with my life. Not just this project, but beyond. I want to keep finding ways to use what I've learned to make real changes in people's lives." Ayomide felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took her breath away. This was everything she had ever wanted for her son, not just success in the conventional sense, but a life filled with purpose and compassion. "My son," she said softly, "you have found your calling, and I couldn't be more proud of the man you've become." As their conversation continued, Ayomide shared her own news. Her healthy snack business had caught the attention of a local school district. They were interested in having her provide nutritious snacks for their school feeding program. It was a big opportunity, one that would require her to scale up her operations significantly. "That's amazing," Mama Adedayo exclaimed. "You'll be helping to ensure children have access to healthy food. It's so important for their growth and learning." They spent the rest of the call brainstorming ideas for how Ayomide could manage this new opportunity. Adedayo suggested she look into microfinance options to get the capital needed to expand. Ayomide, in turn, talked about the possibility of partnering with other women in the community, creating a cooperative that could handle larger orders. As the call drew to a close, both mother and son felt a sense of excitement about the future. They were each, in their own ways, working to make the world a little bit better, and they were doing it together, supporting and inspiring each other across the miles that separated them. The weeks turned into months, and before they knew it, Adedayo's graduation was approaching. His final year had been a whirlwind of activity, completing his coursework, continuing his work on the water project, and preparing for what came next. He had received several job offers from engineering firms and development organizations, all impressed by his innovative work and dedication to social impact. Ayomide, meanwhile, had been working tirelessly to save money for the trip to Adedayo's graduation. She was determined to be there to see her son receive his diploma, to witness the culmination of all their sacrifices and hard work. Her business was doing well, but she still put aside every extra naira, often going without small luxuries to ensure she would have enough for the journey. As the day of departure drew near, Ayomide found herself filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It would be her first time traveling so far from Lagos, her first time seeing the university where Adedayo had spent the last 4 years. She carefully packed her best clothes, wanting to look her best for this important occasion. The day before she was set to leave, Ayomide received an unexpected visitor. She was in the middle of preparing a batch of chin-chin when she heard a car pull up outside her home. Curious, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. Her heart leapt when she saw a familiar figure step out of the car. Adedayo had come to surprise his mother and escort her to his graduation himself. Ayomide rushed to the door, flinging it open just as Adedayo reached the threshold. For a moment they stood frozen, taking in the sight of each other. Then, with a cry of joy, Ayomide threw her arms around her son, hugging him tightly. As they embraced, Ayomide was struck by how much Adedayo had changed. He stood taller, his shoulders broader, his face more mature. But when he smiled down at her, she saw the same warmth, the same kindness that had always been there. "Surprise," Mama Adedayo said softly, his eyes shining with love and happiness. Ayomide ushered him inside, peppering him with questions about his journey, his studies, his project. As they talked, she couldn't stop looking at him, marveling at the confident young man her son had become. Adedayo, in turn, took in the changes in their home. He noticed the new curtains, the small refrigerator in the corner, the neatly stacked containers of snacks ready for delivery. His mother's business had clearly been thriving in his absence. "Mama," he said, gesturing around the room, "all of this. It's amazing. You've done so well." Ayomide smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "We've both been busy, haven't we? Now sit down and tell me everything while I finish this batch." 5 years had passed since Adedayo's graduation. The bustling streets of Lagos hummed with the familiar cacophony of car horns, street vendors' calls, and the constant chatter of millions of people going about their daily lives. Amidst this organized chaos, on a narrow street lined with small shops and stalls, stood Ayomide's modest establishment. The shop, barely wider than a few arm spans, was a testament to Ayomide's hard work and entrepreneurial spirit. The glass display case at the front showcased an array of golden brown akara, steaming hot puff puff, and other Nigerian delicacies that had become favorites among the local community. The walls were adorned with colorful posters of Nigerian landscapes and a few framed photos, one of Adedayo at his graduation, another of him receiving an award for his water filtration project, and a faded picture of Ayomide holding baby Adedayo. Ayomide stood behind the counter, her hands moving deftly as she arranged a fresh batch of chin-chin in a wicker basket. Despite the early hour, a thin sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead, a result of the heat from the fryers and the humid Lagos air. Her hair, streaked with a few strands of gray, was neatly tied back in a colorful jelly. While the years had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, they had done nothing to diminish the warmth of her smile or the strength in her gaze. As she worked, Ayomide hummed softly to herself, a habit she had developed over years of long days and longer nights. The tune was an old lullaby, one she used to sing to Adedayo when he was a child. Even now, with her son a grown man making his mark on the world, the melody brought a sense of comfort and nostalgia. The bell above the door chimed, a tinkling sound that always made Ayomide's heart leap with anticipation. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise and joy as she saw the tall, handsome man standing in the doorway. "Adedayo," she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "My son." Adedayo's face broke into a wide grin as he stepped into the shop. At 30 years old, he cut an impressive figure. His once lanky frame had filled out, his shoulders broad and posture confident. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, a far cry from the worn hand-me-downs of his youth. But it was his eyes that truly showed how far he had come. They shone with intelligence, compassion, and an unwavering sense of purpose. "Mama," he called out, striding across the small shop in 2 quick steps and enveloping Ayomide in a warm embrace. The scent of her, a mixture of palm oil, baking spices, and the subtle floral fragrance she had worn for as long as he could remember, filled his nostrils, instantly transporting him back to his childhood. Ayomide hugged her son tightly, marveling as always at how her little boy had grown into this accomplished man. When they finally parted, she held him at arm's length, her eyes roaming over his face, as if memorizing every detail. "Look at you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "So handsome, so successful. Your father would be so proud." The mention of Adedayo's father, rare as it was, hung in the air for a moment, a bittersweet reminder of the past. Adedayo squeezed his mother's hands gently. "Everything I am, everything I've achieved, is because of you, Mama," he said softly. "I wouldn't be here without your sacrifices." Ayomide felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to give in to the emotion of the moment just yet. "Come," she said, leading Adedayo to the small table at the back of the shop where she usually took her meals. "Sit. Let me make you some tea. You must be tired from your journey." As Ayomide busied herself with preparing the tea, Adedayo settled into one of the worn wooden chairs. He looked around the shop, taking in the familiar sights and smells. This place had been a constant in his life, a symbol of his mother's strength and determination. From his earliest memories of helping her knead dough as a child, to the long nights studying by lamplight at this very table, to now a successful engineer returning home, this shop had been the backdrop to their shared journey. Ayomide returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, setting them on the table before taking a seat across from her son. "Now," she said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity, "tell me everything. How was your trip? How long can you stay? And why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Adedayo chuckled, warming his hands around the cup of tea. "One question at a time, Mama," he said with a smile. "The trip was good, tiring but good. I can stay for a few weeks this time." He paused, taking a sip of the tea, savoring the familiar blend of herbs and spices. "And I didn't tell you because I have some news. Big news." Ayomide leaned forward, her full attention on her son. "News? What kind of news?" Adedayo took a deep breath, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I've been offered a new position," he began. "A really important one, with the United Nations in New York." Ayomide's eyes widened. "New York," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "In America." Adedayo nodded. "Yes, Mama. They want me to work on global water and sanitation initiatives. It's an incredible opportunity to expand the work we've been doing here in Africa to help even more people. Ayomide sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. New York seemed like a world away, a place she had only seen in movies and on television. The thought of her son being so far away made her heart ache, but at the same time, she felt a swell of pride so intense it almost took her breath away. "Oh, Adedayo," she said, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. "That's wonderful news. Imagine, my son, working for the United Nations." She shook her head in wonder. "Your father, if he could see you now." Adedayo squeezed his mother's hand, his expression softening at the mention of the father he had never known. "I like to think he can see us, Mama," he said gently, "that he's been watching over us all this time." Ayomide nodded, allowing herself a moment to remember the man she had loved, the man who had given her the greatest gift of her life in Adedayo. Then, shaking off the melancholy, she focused back on her son. "So, when do you leave? How long will you be gone?" Here, Adedayo hesitated. He took another sip of his tea, gathering his thoughts. "That's the thing, Mama," he said slowly. "It's not a temporary position. They want me to relocate to New York, permanently." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ayomide felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Permanent. Her son moving to the other side of the world, permanently. She tried to speak, but found her voice had deserted her. Seeing the shock on his mother's face, Adedayo hurried on. "But Mama, that's not all. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want you to come with me." Ayomide blinked, sure she had misheard. "Come. With you," she repeated. Adedayo nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mama. To New York. We could start a new life there together. You could expand your business. New Yorkers would love your cooking, I'm sure of it, and we wouldn't have to be apart." Ayomide's mind was spinning. Leave Lagos? Leave the only home she had ever known? The idea seemed impossible, terrifying even. This shop, this city, they were her whole world. How could she possibly leave it all behind? But as she looked into her son's eyes, she saw the same determination, the same hope that she had felt all those years ago when she had vowed to give him a better life. And she realized that perhaps this was the culmination of that vow, a chance for both of them to reach heights she had never dared to dream of. "Oh, Adedayo," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. It's such a big decision." Adedayo leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I know it's a lot to take in, Mama, and I don't expect you to decide right away. But please think about it. We could have a whole new life, new opportunities, and we'd be together." Ayomide nodded slowly. "I will think about it," she promised. "But for now, let's celebrate your news. My son, working for the United Nations. Who would have thought?" As they continued to talk, the shop slowly came to life around them. Regular customers began to trickle in, each one greeted warmly by Ayomide. Many of them recognized Adedayo, marveling at how much he had grown and congratulating him on his success. Ayomide watched with pride as her son interacted with the community that had watched him grow up, his manner easy and friendly despite his impressive achievements. The day passed in a blur of activity. Ayomide went about her usual routine, frying batches of akara, serving customers, chatting with the other shopkeepers on the street. But her mind was elsewhere, mulling over Adedayo's proposal. She found herself looking at her little shop with new eyes, wondering if she could really leave it all behind. As evening fell and the last customer left, Ayomide began the process of closing up shop. Adedayo insisted on helping, falling easily into the routine he remembered from his childhood. As they worked side by side, Ayomide felt a pang in her heart. How many more evenings like this would they have if Adedayo moved to New York? Once everything was cleaned and put away, they made their way to Ayomide's small apartment above the shop. It was a modest space, but it was home. Photos of Adedayo through the years adorned the walls, charting his growth from a chubby-cheeked baby to the accomplished man he was today. As Ayomide prepared a simple dinner of jollof rice and chicken, Adedayo sat at the small kitchen table, filling her in on more details about his work and the opportunity in New York. He spoke of the challenges facing many communities around the world when it came to clean water and sanitation, his voice passionate as he described the projects he hoped to implement. Ayomide listened intently as she cooked, her heart swelling with pride at her son's dedication and compassion. When the food was ready, they sat down to eat, falling into a comfortable silence punctuated by the occasional comment or question. As they were finishing their meal, Ayomide finally broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind all day. "Adedayo," she began, her voice serious. "This move to New York. Are you sure it's what you want?" Adedayo put down his fork, giving his mother his full attention. "I am, Mama," he said firmly. "It's an incredible opportunity to make a real difference in the world." And he hesitated for a moment before continuing, "I think it could be wonderful for both of us." Ayomide nodded slowly. "Tell me more about this idea of me coming with you," she said. "What would it be like? Where would we live?" Encouraged by his mother's questions, Adedayo launched into an explanation. He had clearly given this a lot of thought. He spoke of finding an apartment in a diverse neighborhood where Ayomide might feel more at home. He talked about the vibrant food scene in New York and how Ayomide's Nigerian cuisine could find a niche there. He mentioned the large Nigerian community in the city and the cultural events they could attend together. As Adedayo talked, Ayomide found herself being swept up in his enthusiasm. The idea of starting fresh in a new country was still daunting, but she could see the possibilities it presented. And the thought of being with her son, of not having to say goodbye again, was deeply appealing. "It won't be easy," Adedayo admitted, reaching across the table to take his mother's hand. "There will be challenges. But Mama, think of how far we've come already. From that tiny shack where I was born to here, we've faced so much together. I believe we can do this too." Ayomide squeezed her son's hand, feeling a surge of the same determination that had carried her through the hardest times of her life. "You're right," she said softly. "We have come far. And perhaps this is the next step in our journey." Adedayo's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean?" Ayomide held up a hand, tempering her son's excitement. "It means I will consider it seriously," she said. "It's a big decision, Adedayo. I need time to think, to pray about it." Adedayo nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was asking. "Of course, Mama. Take all the time you need. I'm here for a few weeks, we can talk more about it." As they cleared the table and washed the dishes together, a comfortable silence fell between them. Both were lost in thought, contemplating the potential changes ahead. For Ayomide, memories flooded her mind of the day she discovered she was pregnant. Alone and afraid of the years of struggle, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and sheltered, of Adedayo's first day of school, his graduation, his first big project. Each memory was a stepping stone that had led them to this moment, this possibility of a new life in a faraway land. That night, as Ayomide lay in bed, sleep eluded her. She could hear Adedayo's soft breathing from the living room where he slept on the couch, just as he had during his visits home from university. The familiar sound comforted her, even as her mind raced with thoughts of New York. She thought about her little shop, the business she had built from nothing. Could she really leave it behind? But then again, hadn't she always taught Adedayo to chase his dreams, to never let fear hold him back? Shouldn't she follow her own advice? As the first light of dawn began to filter through her window, Ayomide finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, interspersed with the familiar sights and sounds of her beloved Lagos. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. During the day, Ayomide went about her usual routine at the shop, but her interactions with her regular customers took on a new poignancy as she considered the possibility of leaving. She found herself memorizing the little details the way Mrs. Adedayo always asked for her puff to be extra crispy, how little Tund from next door would press his nose against the display case, eyeing the chin with longing. In the evenings, she and Adedayo would sit for hours, talking through the practicalities of the potential move. Adedayo had done extensive research, and he shared everything he had learned about life in New York, the different neighborhoods, the cost of living, the healthcare system, the transportation. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony of Ayomide's apartment, watching the sun set over the Lagos skyline, Adedayo brought up a topic they had both been avoiding. "Mama," he said softly, "I know leaving Papa's grave behind would be hard." Ayomide felt her breath catch in her throat. She turned to look at her son, seeing in his face echoes of the man she had loved so long ago. Yes, she admitted, it would be very hard. Adedayo reached out and took his mother's hand. "I've been thinking about that," he said. What What if we brought a part of him with us? Ayomide looked at him quizzically. What do you mean? Well, Adedayo continued, we could take some soil from his grave, put it in a special container. That way, wherever we go, he's with us in a way, and we could create a small memorial for him in our new home. Tears welled up in Ayomide's eyes at her son's thoughtfulness. She squeezed his hand tightly, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion. That's a beautiful idea, Adedayo. Your father would be so proud of the man you've become. As the days passed, Ayomide found herself warming to the idea of the move. She began to see it not as leaving her old life behind, but as expanding her world, continuing the journey she had started when she first held Adedayo.